So we're going to get started. So welcome to tonight's panel discussion on mental health impacts of digital usage on young people. I'm Kristen Pierce-Freaky, the Executive Director of Austin Child Guidance Center, and I'll be moderating tonight's panel discussion. And this discussion is part of our panel discussion series. We've been doing it about a year. And for those who are interested in learning more about uncomfortable and sensitive topics and how to address them with children, here's a little bit about Austin Child Guidance Center. We have a 70-year history of providing accessible, high-quality, trauma-informed health services to children and their families in the Austin community. We focus on three main areas for our programming: care and treatment, which includes individual, family, and group therapy; psychological assessments and consultations; and psychiatric care and medication management. We also offer the only walk-in children's mental health clinic in Central Texas. Our second program area is training and professional development programs, which are opportunities for staff and community and other community groups to have access to various different training and professional development. And our third program area is community education and awareness, which includes events like this, other workshops and presentations and things that we provide to the community, most of which are provided at no cost. ACGC, Austin Child Guidance Center, employs a team of highly trained, experienced social workers, therapists, psychologists, and psychiatrists and case managers who provide a wide range of services. We are currently offering services via teletherapy, but we're going to be resuming in-person services in the next week or so, now that we've gone back down to level 4. With the addition of teletherapy, we are able to provide care for any child or teen up to the age of 17 living in the state of Texas. Our goal is to provide access to high-quality mental health care and a safe, equitable, and healing space for children and families. As part of that work, we work to confront systemic barriers to mental health, which includes discrimination and economic injustice in our community. Now that I have concluded my commercial for ACGC, I'm going to just go over some housekeeping items. Please keep your microphones and video off during the presentation. This will be recorded and posted on our website in the next week or so, so you're certainly able to access it again if you need to. The chat box is open for you to ask questions and to engage with panelists and participants, so feel free to post resources or relevant information in that chat box, and we will send the resources out to everybody who participated next week. And we ask that you keep your questions related to the topic at hand. Each of us comes to these discussions with different perspectives and experiences, political views, and comfort levels about the various topics. We ask that everybody is respectful of others who may not be in the same place as you are. We acknowledge that some of these topics can be difficult and may be brought up and may make some people uncomfortable, but we ask that you allow for room for conversation to happen. And finally, we ask you to refrain from using any abusive language towards others participating in this discussion in the chat. People that can't, I mean, we've never had an issue, but if we do, people will be removed from the platform as necessary. So now I'd like to introduce you to our panelists for the evening. Each comes with a deep knowledge, commitment, and passion for children, families, and advocating for ways our society can better address issues facing kids and teens today. So first we have Evelyn Azuela, is a licensed professional counselor with a Master's of Arts in Counseling from the University of Texas at San Antonio, and she is a member of the ACGC team. As a bilingual therapist and mental health professional, she has 10 years of experience working with a socioeconomically diverse population, and she's skilled in crisis intervention, cognitive behavioral therapy, and trauma-informed care. Evelyn is dedicated to empowering youth and their families and seeking self-acceptance and reaching their professional and personal goals. Mike Burns is a former Apple Store veteran and is a force to be reckoned with when it comes to technology. Witnessing firsthand the power of a smartphone in the hands of his 4 teenagers, he decided to take on the job of digital cop in his hormonal household. Apple products are amazing. However, they can be abused and misused if there are no rules or limitations within a household. Don't know how to lock up your child's computers, iPhones, or iPads? That's where the iPhone Dad from Hell comes in. With a common sense approach to digital parenting, Burnsy believes technology is here to stay, and it's good to form healthy digital habits that start as soon as your hand soon as you hand electronics to your children. And finally, Emma Lemke is a college student or a freshman at Washington University in St. Louis, but hails from Birmingham, Alabama. Her senior year in high school, she co-founded the Log Off movement and Technically Politics. Log Off is a movement dedicated to rethinking social media by teens for teens. The movement has grown to include a podcast, website, blog, digital challenge, character ED, I don't know if I'm saying that correct, well-being initiative, and 3 teen leadership groups composed of over 70 teams representing 16 countries. Currently, Emma works for a youth lobbying campaign dedicated to pushing forth big tech regulation that she co-founded with Eliza Copins. Technically Politics, Emma regularly engages in public speaking and press opportunities to spread digital consciousness and integrate youth voices in conversations regarding tech. Emma regularly engages in public speaking and press opportunities to spread digital consciousness and integrate youth voices in conversations regarding tech. She's been on Medium, UNICEF, NPR, and Morning in America. Welcome to all of our panelists. Thank you guys so much for participating. So just with the pandemic, encouraging less face-to-face interaction and usage of cell phones and other electronic technology technology use has drastically increased, especially among adolescents. In particular, adolescents have been drawn to social media platforms such as Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, and I'm sure there are others. Obviously, digital usage has both positive and negative effects. Obviously, it can help fulfill young people's socialization and connectedness needs, especially in environments where they're, especially earlier in the pandemic when we were all at home and weren't at school, allowing young users to access a diverse network of people without the limits of physical space and distance and create strong positive relationships that can, again, meet their needs for connection. However, increased digital usage can also affect their sleep schedules, daily physical activity, and encourage inappropriate behavior. Additionally, it's linked to increases in anxiety and/or depression and can also expose them to cyberbullying. So this panel discussion will give caregivers the information and tools to help encourage and navigate healthy usage with their children. So I'm going to kind of just throw out my first question and we are going to go from there. So Evelyn, in general, what are the impacts of digital usage on teens or kids, or, you know, in your experience?
Yeah, so thanks, Kristen. I think that you just shared, right? Like there are positives and negatives to using electronics, and it just depends on the age of when the electronics are used, right? So when we talk about kids that are younger than 2 years old, really it's recommended that the use of electronics is at a minimum of 0, right? Because, you know, the interaction, the one-on-one interaction with parents is really what's going to help that development of language and social skills and all those great things along with the ages, right? The older they get, the American Pediatric Association recommends that the usage of electronics is still low to an hour a day, right? And so it all depends, like you said, right? With COVID and the pandemic, things really changed for everyone, especially for kids. And that was one of the ways that they could communicate with their friends and really have that social time with others outside of their home. And so that became really difficult for a lot of kids, and especially kids in like teens and school-age kids. And so, like I said, the positive impacts are good, but then also come those negative impacts, which can be damaging if parents don't create those limits and those boundaries around technology, right? So technology can be good as long as there's those limits and boundaries, and those are set at an early age, right? Building those healthy habits at an early age where parents can model those healthy habits, right? Like, so if you're interacting with your child, trying to limit, you know, the use of your phone or checking your email, or even checking in on, you know, what's going on using Facebook, right? Or even at the dinner table, trying to limit the use of the phone and maybe just setting times where these are going to be electronic free spaces, right? So at the dinner table, maybe when we play games together, or special family time can be helpful. And so if you set those limits and those boundaries early, and you encourage and empower kids to be part of the plan, that social media plan of what are we going to do as a family? How are we going to make this work for us? And including, the values and morals of each family, then that will help limit those negative impacts, or those mental health risks, which, like you mentioned, right, the anxiety, the depression, there's something specific called the Facebook depression, right, that comes from, do I have as many likes as my friends, right? Do I have as many friends as other friends at school? Or sometimes even looking at an image of someone having a fun time and you're not able to do that can really impact the way you see yourself, and impact that self-image.
Great, thank you so much. Emma, do you or Mike want to jump in and have anything you want to add?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with everything that Evelyn stated, specifically about the highlight reel. I think that it's very detrimental for a lot of kids, specifically teenagers, specifically in my experience, young females that I've spoken to, being on these apps and seeing these heavily modulated images and not really understanding that these images necessarily are not depicting reality. I think that that's a really important thing to discuss with your children, and that being in the space and being within Log Off, I've had a lot of conversations with teens who echoed the same sentiment, saying, I wish I had known that this was the highlight reel and that I shouldn't compare myself to this unrealistic standard. But oftentimes that's not really being said, because a lot of parents don't understand the nature of the beast that their children are entering. And so I think that that's really important to emphasize that, social media is this highlight reel, and it's very important that children and teens understand that when entering these apps.
Really important information. Mike, did you want to add anything? Or
yeah, I mean, I think, like all things, you got to be careful and not to just turn the keys to the candy store over to your kids and not expect them to regulate themselves. It's unrealistic. When I was a kid, if I went into a candy store, if you let me, I would clear the shelves off, right? So as a parent, it's our jobs to basically set, first and foremost, like, model good behaviors, right? You don't want to be a hypocrite. You don't want to be someone who's living on their phone, but then, totally going after your kids because you've realized that they spent 5 hours on YouTube, and and yet what have you done? So modeling good behavior, and also kind of like setting expectations early as to, hey, this is a privilege. We're going to give this to you, and there's some expectations that come with it. And as long as you're above board and not acting sus, as we say in my house, or sketch, then we're not going to have problems. But once we start seeing that you are not using it appropriately, then sadly we're going to have to intervene. And it happens, smart kids make terrible choices sometimes. So it's our duty as a parent to, kind of keep an eye on things, right? And I would also recommend, like, be careful once you give your child a smartphone and once you give them social media, because once you open up that door, it's very hard to get them to come back, to leave the party and come back to you. So, I think it's good to kind of start off small and work your way up, right?
it's an important point as well. Emma, I know for those of us my age, older people, we tend to sort of use Facebook and other social media platforms and apps, but what are some of the popular apps among younger people, and what are some of the platforms and or activities on some of these platforms that parents and caregivers should be aware of?
That's a wonderful question. I think that we've kind of hit on some of them, specifically for younger audiences. YouTube, I think, is incredibly popular. And as you kind of go into middle school and as you go into high school, Instagram, Snapchat, and now especially in the past 2 years, TikTok. TikTok has run rampant across my generation. And I think I'm one of the only people in my friend group that I know who just refuses to be on the app because it's extremely addictive, and that's a whole other thing. But looking at these platforms and zooming out and saying, what should caregivers really be aware of? What should people know that's occurring within these kind of online universes? I'd say largely that 3 things are at play. So kids are kind of going onto these apps, and like teenagers are, with the promise of connection. I remember I went on Instagram, and I was one of the last in my friend group, and exactly with what Mike had said earlier, I went on having really pushed my parents, not really thinking that initial push would lead to 5 subsequent other ones into different categories. I then went Instagram, then Snapchat, then Twitter, and so on and so forth. But in getting in those spaces and in getting in those apps, I was promised connection. I was told that I would be able to follow as many people as I wanted, and from there I'd have as many conversations as I wanted, and it just seemed very easy and very fun. That's not the nature of the beast, and not the nature of these apps that you're entering into. They're much more complicated, and so many things are at play. One of which is really the quantification of worth. So a lot of kids enter these apps like Instagram and Snapchat and Facebook even, looking for followers, looking to amount likes. And all of these different things are working to provide an image of kids of how their social life should be framed and how much they are really valued. And that's extremely detrimental to any teen, to any child, to say that I can look and compare myself instantly to another person based on a number of meaningless kind of entities and meaningless quantities. Another thing that's really happening is there are a lot of social pressures that are occurring within these apps that take the form of TikTok challenges that can be dangerous. Also video challenges that can be dangerous on YouTube. I've been in close conversation with some working groups with an organization called Fair Play. And one of the groups has a lot of parents who have lost children, sadly, because of these harmful challenges. And it really does show that within these apps and within these platforms, you can have these incredibly harmful challenges, posts that are perpetuated by these algorithms that don't necessarily care about the users and the kids that are within them. And then also you can have some positives, of course, like being able to self-express and being able to like find and connect with other people. But again, it's really important to figure out how to navigate that in the best possible way. And I think Mike really hit the nail on the head when he said, you can't place that expectation on a kid or a teen entering these spaces. It's extremely hard to self-regulate yourself, especially when you have these gigantic big tech platforms and algorithms that are working against you. And you really do have to find levels of friction between you and addictive technologies to keep yourself safe. And a lot of times those levels of friction, whether that be having these conversations with parents, putting in screen time limits, are really crucial to protecting children from these specific apps. Again, I'm hyper focusing on TikTok, Instagram, and Snapchat.
So you mentioned a little something about addiction and how these apps are addicting. I just want to talk, and this is addressing to all the panelists, but let's talk a little bit about screen addiction. What exactly is it? How does it occur? And what, if anything, can parents and caregivers do about that? Anybody can jump in.
Really, it's when it becomes obsessive, right? Like you're obsessed to checking in to see who has changed their status, or you're obsessed into checking to see if you can share, what you did, right? That in that second, or when you're checking more than once an hour, what's happening on your social media. Really, I believe the number that they post was 6 hours a day, more than 6 hours a day on social media. Really worried or overwhelmed or feeling really nervous about what people are posting or when they're going to post, or are they even going to post about me? You're really seeing like symptoms like depressive-like symptoms, or anxiety-like symptoms, like neglecting spending time with family, really loss of interest in school, or even like challenging to focus on like schoolwork or even things at home. You know, just really feeling very overwhelmed with what to post, how to post, when to post, and how people are going to respond to it.
So it's really, you know, from an, you know, when you look at from other types of addiction, it has a lot of the same characteristics of other kinds of addiction in terms of the responses and the behavior. What do we do about this? How do we, you know, how do parents or even, you know, kids who are trying to be conscientious about their usage? I mean, how do you kind of avoid some of these pitfalls?
I'll go ahead and try to answer that a little bit. So avoiding the pitfalls of overusage, I think it's good to start off with, again, setting a healthy expectation as to, hey, we're giving this device to you, but you know what? It's still our device. It might have your name on it, and it might be something that you take to and from school, but at any time, at any place, if I want to go over and pick up your phone and see who it is you're talking to or who it is you're texting, then as a parent, that is my prerogative. And I think it's helpful to do things. You know, we did a contract with my kids, basically putting it in writing, because let me tell you something, they get very short memories when you take something away and they're like, you never told me about this, or you never said you would do this. And so it's very helpful to go ahead and have something in writing, which then you can go back to where it's stated plain and clear, like if you break the rules, these are going to be the consequences. Now, do kids deserve privacy? That's a hard one, because I bet Evelyn and Emma, probably being younger than myself, might have some strong feelings about that. I'm old school. I kind of feel like, and I'm also from New York, so I'm going to assume that you're not being trustworthy until you prove me different with the device, right? So, but once you do that, then yes, absolutely, I will give you all kinds of trust. But and I used to get in trouble down at the Apple store, but I used to tell parents that, good kids make really stupid decisions, and everyone gets horny. You could be the greatest kid ever, but hormones kick in, and that's why I said a very hormonal house. And they can still make very silly mistakes. And social media, is even though I've had the discussion with my kids about being careful who you reach out to, and if some stranger DMs you and they say that you look sexy, whatever, like, don't assume that Justin Bieber type photo that you're looking at is really Justin Bieber. It could be some creepy old dude, and sadly that is the case a lot of times. So I just try to tell them to be very careful. And I still don't, even though I have twin daughters that are turning 18 in a few months, and I'm still nervous about them speaking to strangers, because at that point, there's not much I'm going to be able to do. They're 18, they're adults, they have to make their own decisions, but reaching out to strangers is a big no-no for me. And I'm just being potentially a bit overprotective. And I get it, during the pandemic, these behaviors have skyrocketed. I do have a family member who works in the government, and crimes against children, and it has gone up tenfold during the pandemic. So a lot of people are putting their guards down, and a lot of people are, kids particularly, they're lonely, and they are just desperate to get that need of connection in school, which they weren't getting, so it's sadly those type of situations are really ripe for someone to exploit and take advantage of them. And let's face it, we're all lonely. It's not just unique to children.
For sure.
I've missed a lot of my friends as well, and it's been a very hard time. But hopefully we're coming out of that, right?
I just want to, sorry to interrupt you. I just want to address, kind of what you're speaking to is sort of, the developmental stage of adolescence, right? And sort of by, developmentally, adolescents can be very impulsive, can, make a lot of rash decisions, can make a lot of poor decisions, are more susceptible to peer pressures and more easily influenced. And again, these are all things that are like developmentally appropriate in a lot of ways, meaning that this is not, not specific necessarily to any one child. I mean, as a group, adolescents and young adults meet a lot of these criteria, which means that when you have a technology like what we're talking about and a lot of these opportunities to engage with, whether it's pornography, whether it's, random people who are, DMing you and other things, it's just that much more important to be, as a parent or a caregiver, really on top of that, and to be open and have really open and honest conversations. I wanted to just reference this comment in the chat. I work at a school and have elementary age students who seem to be truly addicted to their devices, YouTube and gaming, not social media yet. How can we at school help these students navigate healthy usage when they don't have those same boundaries at home? Who would like to answer first?
I think that's one of the best ways to include any type of instruction or any way of teaching kids about just, electronics in general is in a controlled space, right? In a controlled space where teacher can see what's going on, what's happening, and they can determine what's appropriate for the student, right? So right there, the teacher can implement limits and boundaries and even have discussions about what it is to be on YouTube, right? What is appropriate to watch on YouTube? How can YouTube be a learning or be used as an educational tool, right? So really finding those beneficial activities to using those platforms and informing students if they have questions about well, what if I do this and it's something that might be harmful to them, right? Really empowering the student by providing that information and sharing that knowledge so that they can understand how to better use those different platforms.
Emma, did you have something?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think that that's one of the reasons why I created Log Off to begin with. And I've really stayed in the space is because I think that educational aspect is going to be so crucial to developing these healthier habits. When I was going through middle school, we had something called the character ed program, which was just, how to build better experiences and how to be a good citizen going forward. And it was not the most helpful. I think a lot of educational systems, it is difficult because teachers that are being expected to have these conversations don't really understand why teens are gravitating towards social media. And I think that it's very difficult for members of other generations to approach that conversation. And it can be scary, especially because you don't want to really turn kids away from you and for them to not want to come to you to ask these important questions. I always say in those spaces, it's really important to come from the least judgmental perspective. I think that it's very, very important to ask their point of view. Whenever I am asking someone about addiction, I always say, why do you go on social media? Who do you follow? Walk me through it, as though I want them to teach me. And then I think from that perspective, you can kind of gain the best insight on why individuals are specifically turning to these devices. And then you can tailor your conversation, because again, social media experiences and the impact that social media, or again, gaming or technology has on each kid is going to be very different, but there are going to be underlying threads that you can really address and underlying harms. Just being able to have those conversations so that they can be preventative and reactionary, teaching what do you do when you see a certain habit, when you see cyberbullying, when someone DMs you. And then also, saying to a kid, I know that you're going to go on these platforms. I know you're going to go in these online ecosystems. Here's how you can best navigate. I think coming at it from that really well-rounded perspective, being as curious as possible is going to be really important. And again, there is space, like Evelyn said, in these controlled settings to really do good and to develop these healthier habits. So then for parents in the household, it can kind of, you can flip that direction and say, then it's easier for parents to engage in this conversation because there is a jumping off point and there is then that foundation that has been laid. Because again, it can be difficult as a child to want to engage in a conversation with the person that, you know, is like giving you the device. And especially too, when being a teen and being in these technological spaces, it's hard to describe, you know, it's part of your social life. A lot of times people feel like their phone is their identity. So it can be hard to kind of open up and to have that conversation. And again, being in a controlled setting with school can be a great point to start.
I agree with that. And if I could, I would just add, you know, and it's difficult to know because different schools have different requirements, but I think if you're as a teacher, you know, you've got a class of 20 or 25 kids and you're one teacher and maybe you have an assistant, you know, realistically, the ability to police, you know, what every child in your classroom is looking at, if they're kind of pulling out their phone under their desk, is going to be a challenge. So I think, you know, if it's permissible at your school to, you know, everybody walks into the classroom and all cell phones go into some kind of basket that sits on the teacher's desk during class. If that's something that you're able to do, I would encourage that. I think if you as a instructor have a device policy for your classroom, and then as you're communicating with parents, maybe at certain points of the year, or certainly at the beginning of the year, about like, or your website, like, this is a policy in my class, these are my expectations for my students. And maybe provide some data for parents around why you make these choices, and that, you know, perhaps, you know, I know as a parent that had kids in schools, a lot of times if there were things that my child was doing, I tried to mirror some of those things that they were doing in school at home. One, to support my child so that they could, if they were getting it both at school and at home, they would sort of perfect it or learn it more quickly, whatever the process was. But I think certainly as an educator, if you have a certain policy and you inform your students' parents of the policy and the expectations around devices in your classroom, you can encourage certainly parents to kind of try to mirror some of those same limits at home. And even if you don't openly say that, perhaps, you know, knowing that you have a policy in school and knowing that you have a standard, some parents may mirror that at home just because they think it's a great idea. And as a way that, and to Emma's point, it's a jumping off point, right? It's a conversation starter. And if there's something already that's happening at school, it's a great idea. We're going to do this at home too. So I think that they're, depending on the institution that you work in and whether or not you're allowed to collect the devices of your students, you know, empowering educators to do what they can to minimize kids, you know, drifting off and sneaking their phones and other things during class. Mike, did you want to weigh in, or can we move on to the next?
No, I mean, it's funny in that question, like, I could see, ideally, I would like my values at home be mirrored at school, not the other way around, to be honest. However, I get it. One of the other slippery slopes that I know a lot of teachers are dealing with now, post-pandemic, is, I know in my kids, I'm in Spokane, Washington. The school my kids go to, they now, you know, since they're back in person classes since September, they have been able to keep their phones at their desks. And I get the idea behind that is that a lot of kids are pretty much dealing with trauma, right? Post-pandemic. So a lot of them feel that they need to have their phone with them, just if they need to reach out to their parents or whatever. But I see that being problematic, and that a lot of kids will use it for other reasons. You know, ideally they're allowed to have their phones for that specific use, but a lot of them will exploit it, and they'll just be texting kids on the other side of the classroom or playing games, which I have a kid that's been guilty of doing. So I think that's been really challenging for teachers as well, is trying to, you know, rein that back in as far as their phone usage in the classroom.
No, that's an important, you know, I mean, I agree. I mean, it's difficult, to your point about kind of wanting our values at home to be mirrored at school. It can be a slippery slope. Somebody else mentioned, you know, that there are positives to social media and to online technology, you know, I wanted to sort of focus a little bit on how we can, how much information can we safely share online? What are safe ways to make friends online? Are there safe ways to make friends online? Are there safe ways to interact with strangers? And if there are, what are some of those, you know, what are ways that we can help to encourage or teach our children how to use some of these things safely? Anyone?
I'll take it.
Okay.
So, yeah, I have a son who loves Minecraft, and you know the split that I've seen is girls tend to veer off towards social media because I have two girls and two boys, and the boys veer off into gaming. I have a son who is crazy about Minecraft, so crazy that I'm foolishly enough probably going to take him to, there's a Minecon convention next summer in Orlando, right? So that's going to be a big trip that we've been planning. And I'm okay with him spending time on Minecraft. A lot of the gamers do use Discord, and Discord can be kind of dangerous sometimes because it's not very well policed, and there are a lot of graphic images, violence, porn, that sort of thing in there. So I think if your kid is using those tools, then there are certain apps out there that can monitor their chat logs, right? And they'll use AI to then alert you if there's anything alarming in there. A great tool that we use in my house is called Bark, B-A-R-K, and it basically goes through their backups at the end of the day and alerts us to anything that they feel is, you know, if there's text messaging or social media that's around sex, drugs, self-harm, bullying, that sort of thing, you know, suicidal ideation, it's going to alert us. And sadly, we've had to use it, and it paid for itself. So I'm sorry that took a very weird turn, didn't it? But I guess my point is that if they're going to be using those things, insist that you get their credentials, get their, you know, their usernames, their passwords, and just like you have the ability to walk over and pick up their phone at any time, you then tell them you have the ability to go in and look at their chat logs in any of these, you know, type software. Discord, that's what we've done with my son. But I also know that Bark does a good job of monitoring a lot of those things as well. So yeah, that's what I got for you.
Thank you. Emma or Evelyn, you know, is there a safe way to make friends online? And if so, what are they?
You know, I think that's a really interesting question, and I don't think that there's one singular answer, because again, with social media, each interaction is different. So I could say one safe way to interact with someone on Instagram, and that might not be applicable to like other forms of technology. And that's kind of one of the difficult things about regulation related to technology and social media. I would just say from a teen's perspective on what I wish I would have known going in, especially as a young female, getting like weird DMs, which really do appear constantly. I think Mike was right. Like I received DMs like that probably over 50 times being on social media. And I think that what I would say to a younger version of me and to other kids and the parents is that you just really have to be as cautious as possible, especially when a stranger reaches out to you like that. Not assume worst intentions, but in a way, assume that you have to have your guard up. I think connecting with individuals online can just be such a slippery slope. I think that if you have these important conversations with your parents and you have that trust and you've built kind of that familiarity with having discussions related to digital well-being and healthier tech habits, then an important thing to say to your kid too is if you feel afraid, if you are in a situation where a stranger has reached out to you, know that you can come to us and we're not going to judge you, we will help you. Kind of having those important conversations too, and allowing the kid to know that those avenues are open for assistance and not just for judgment, again, is really, really important. Especially for, again, young females who are probably a lot of times inundated with weird messages like that. But again, I think there is something to say too, though, about the fact that important connections can be made. There are some friends that I only talk to from my hometown via social media. And I do want to emphasize that social media and technology can be this multifaceted entity, and that it is important to remember that. And there are cases and examples of people connecting and becoming good friends. But there are also so many cases too that skew in the opposite direction of kids being harmed, of dangerous situations that parents were not aware of. And again, just having conversations, being open to engaging in those kind of experiences, and in how to navigate them is just really, really important from a child's perspective and then from a parent's.
Sure, I appreciate that. Before we go, I want to get to the other question that's in the chat. Before we do that, I just want to quickly, we skipped over, any panelists, how do online platforms and social media affect, the self-esteem and body image of young people? This is something that comes up a lot. I think especially, I have a adolescent daughter and, so all the things, but so I'm just, from the perspective of some of our panelists, what is the effect on self-esteem and body image as a result of social media?
I can touch on this first,
Sure, yeah.
because I think that it's really, really difficult for young women and young females, specifically in that crucial developmental period, being a middle schooler going to high school. When I was going through and downloading media, I was developing a sense of self. You develop your self-identity. You're constantly faced with new interactions, attraction, all of that, dating. So many of those situations and experiences arise during these really crucial ages. And then when social media gets put into the mix, it can really complicate matters, especially, again, being a young female and going on these apps and not understanding that a lot of celebrities and even people in your everyday life modify images, and that you're seeing the highlight reel can be incredibly detrimental to a young female, to a young male, to anyone who takes that as reality. Because what do you do when you have a standard for yourself that you can never meet, and that is completely impossible? That can lead to, in my case, it led to increased rates of anxiety and depression, and a really skewed self-sense and self-body image. So I think that it's really difficult, but one of the ways that you can mitigate those harms to body image and to self-image and just all of the negative consequences that come with the usage of social media is by gaining better digital consciousness. And how I kind of frame that is, if I go into apps and I have these conversations with my parents, if teens can understand that when they go into these online spaces, there will be editing, it will be a highlight reel. Algorithms are at play to perpetuate harmful content, and that content can impact you mentally and physically. Understanding that before entering these spaces and these ecosystems can be really, really important to mitigating, or at least kind of taking away a lot of the power that these negative harms can really cause. So that's from a teen's perspective. And I think, again, it's very important from the parents' angle is to really engage in having these conversations, no matter how uncomfortable it can really be. Because I know that oftentimes a lot of parents don't know how to navigate these conversations related to body image, but it's really crucial, and especially for young females.
Evelyn, did you want to add something?
I think you really hit the nail on what you said, right? Is that it can be very detrimental, especially if coming into social media, not understanding that these images are distorted, right? Like even now, my image is distorted. I think I use I think blurring the imperfections in the face, right? So even adults do it. And so just what's really important is to really empower your children in talking to them about it before they even engage in any usage of these platforms, right? Like, what are the expectations? What can they expect from logging in or signing up to these platforms, right? And really engaging them in an open conversation and asking them what they think about these things, right? Like, what would you think? What would you, how would you react if you were to see this person, on social media, and then you see them in face to face and they're totally different, right? So really, I think the main point or the key point is to really empower your child through information and through knowledge, right? Giving them the tools before they are able to even log in or sign up to something that they might not understand or might not be able to really process or figure out how it works, right? Because if we tell a child like, oh, there's algorithms out there that, are gonna do this, and they're gonna be like, what? I don't even know what that means. So really having that, based on their age level, based on your level of comfortableness, right, with them, really have that open, honest conversation, and really maybe just starting off with asking them, what do you think social media is about, right? What do you think comes from social media, from, going on it or having friends on there, right? And then talking about, and then maybe that can lead to a deeper conversation about how to include safety and privacy and making sure that they're safe while they're using it.
And I would just jump in, in addition to the altered images or the filters, a lot of these, especially the more popular influencers and certainly celebrities, they've got a team of people with hair and makeup and lighting and all these things so that, it's not, it looks like it's somebody doing a makeup tutorial on YouTube as an example, but that one individual has a team of 6 people in the room that are lighting them, that have done their hair and makeup, that are making them look incredible, and that's the everyday person walking around. Like, we don't have that. We don't have a team. We don't have special lighting when we walk around. This is there is a healthy dose of suspended reality in a lot of the things that you're seeing, and even to explain what that's like, what that means to your kids. To your point, Evelyn, I think is important. Mike, did you want to weigh in on this before we move on?
All right, can I add just one more thing? There is this show on Netflix. It's really great. I've used it in groups before with teenagers, and they seem to like it and they seem to understand. And it's not like, well, my mom or my dad, they're telling me this stuff and I really don't want to hear it from them, right? It's just a show that talks about the importance of safety and kind of what you touched on, Kristen, about like, there's lighting and there's these professionals that are putting makeup on you and all these things. And so I'll try and put it on the chat. It's really great, both in English and Spanish. And I think it was really helpful when I used it in my groups.
Thanks, Evelyn. So I wanted to make sure we got to the question in the chat. So are there any magic numbers from the professionals, as in maximum number of hours on screen between school and bedtime, and when screens go off before bed? I'm gonna have you weigh in on this first, Mike.
Okay, so the magic number in my house right now is 2.5 hours. We used to be really gangster pre-pandemic and only gave them an hour, but I realized they needed more time, with at-home learning and everything. And this was, keep in mind, we're an Apple family, had to take advantage of those employee discounts while I could. So all my kids have iPhones and we have Mac computers. So when they sent them home Chromebooks, I was not happy because it was very hard to manage those things. I had to do a little bit deeper dive with that. And I got to tell you, a lot of the software that if you're a parent, don't rely on the software that the schools install on these cheap Chromebooks, because they tend to not do a very good job, and kids are very smart and a lot of times can circumvent those. But that being said, yeah, 2.5 hours is the magic number. On the weekends, if my son's gaming, we'll give him upwards to 5 hours, but we generally try to make him earn that. And we also make him take breaks. I noticed early on years ago with my oldest son, when boys are gaming for hours at a time, boy, when you tell them that they can't game anymore, they are so grumpy and they are so miserable, and they will just be hyper emotional as well. Like, it's amazing. They'll either go to rage, or you can see like their eyes welling up in tears because they just want another 20 minutes, to finish whatever it is they were doing. So anyway, that being said, 2.5 hours is plenty, but don't think I don't use that as Also, if they're struggling in school, if they're bringing home any D's, forget it. D's, no keys in my house. And a D will also get you knocked down to about maybe an hour a day instead of 2.5 a day until you get those grades back up. So, but every house is different, we try to be somewhat regimented about it, but you always have to put a little room in there for, special time, especially, I all in on rewards as well. If they want to earn more time, then come up with a list of things they can do to earn more screen time, use it as currency. You'd be surprised, especially the boys, how well that works.
Yeah, I think leverage in general in parenting is an important thing to use. Is there, and this is to any panelist, what's the right age to, give your child their first cell phone or to allow them to use online platforms? Is there a right age?
I don't know that there's necessarily a right age. Obviously, like you don't want a 2-year-old on social media, right? But I think it has to do with the family, right? What are the family's values? What are their rules around access to electronics and technology, and how are they going to navigate that as a family, right? So establishing those rules, those limits and boundaries within the family and adhering to them, right? Just like I think Mike had mentioned earlier, is as a parent, you have to model for your child, right? If you want them to do a certain thing, then, the best way is to model that. And so I know, Kristen, you said like any time limits or any limits on when they should or shouldn't use electronics or screen time. Really, you want to limit using screen time at least an hour before going to bed, just because it can create a disturbance to sleep and just being able to fall asleep. And you really want to try to limit using any type of screen time to less than 3 hours a day. Again, that's just really, you want to encourage your child to do other activities, more physical activities or more, activities within the home with, family and friends. And really, I know that Mike, you touched on, rewards and consequences around technology and electronic use, but really what research suggests is that just heightens kind of like, it makes it like just more, I want that more, right? Like if it's a reward, I want that more. If it's going to be a consequence, I'm going to want this more, right? Because I can't have it. So it just heightens that level of wanting to use that device.
Emma, did you want to add something? Oh, yeah. Sorry, Evelyn.
It's okay.
I thought you were done.
So just, instead try to use rewards and consequences around, activities as a family, like let's have one time, or let's, spend this time talking about something that you really love, or maybe cooking together, things like that.
I'll just add, oh no, go ahead, Emma.
Oh no, I was going to just say I completely agree with both perspectives. Just emphasizing consistency. So if you're going to set in those limits, making sure that like your child is aware of those limits and of rules and standards. But also just again, engaging with your child in these conversations on why you're setting the limits, or at least why you're doing that, just so it doesn't seem like an authoritarian decision, like you can't have your screens. Really understanding the issue at hand and why you exactly are putting them in place, out of love and out of protection. I wish that my parents would have taken that perspective with me. I know that in my head, I was thinking like, wow, they just don't want me to have a social life. But again, just engaging with that conversation is going to be where understanding takes place. And I think that your child will really engage in the conversation if you come at it from that curious perspective and angle. And then again, too, I think Evelyn, you had mentioned something regarding this, just saying, go do something else. There are so many other things that you can do when you're not on your screen. Just again, teaching a generation that I feel as though has lost the ability to be bored, how to be bored again. I think that's just super critical.
I think that's a really important comment and point. I was just going to add, 100 years ago, before there were smartphones and cell phones, my mom would take the regular princess phones or whatever off the hook during dinner, right? So that was like the phone, not only could we not be on the phone, but the phone didn't ring during dinner because it was a distraction. So I think, simple things like, don't allow children to have devices or phones at the dinner table or whenever you're having a meal. I strongly discourage people from allowing kids to sleep with their phones, because even though if you might give them a 10 o'clock cutoff, if it's with them, there's that temptation like on their nightstand or in bed with them or whatever. And so I think taking the phones at whatever the cutoff is, and whether you keep them in your room or whatever until the next morning, or if they need them to go to school or whatever. But I think we want to be able to trust our kids, but I think Mike has said a couple of times, even really smart kids, really kids that get really good grades and other things, make bad choices, especially around social media, especially when, if all your friends are doing group chats at 11 p.m. when your parents are fast asleep, and they're chatting or whatever through the night. Or even worse, if there's, we're going to get to this next, like bullying or any kind of intimidation or things that, are going on in group chats and other things on social media, or God forbid, your child is communicating with someone they met online who they think is, a peer who's really, not a peer. If you're not able to monitor these things because your child is sleeping with their phone, I think that that's a really big problem. And so just being mindful around, it's not about, many adolescents will thank you that we don't trust them. And it's not, it is and it isn't, right? It's like, sure, I trust you, but you're also, an adolescent. And so, there's overwhelming evidence to suggest that you're not always going to be able to resist a lot of the temptations that may come if someone texts you in the middle of the night, right? So we will remove those temptations by just not having the device in a place where you will even be aware if someone's texting you in the middle of the night. And I think sometimes, not only is there there's a very anxious generation out there, and I'm, speaking as a mental health professional, is a generation of anxious parents, generation of anxious kids being raised by anxious parents. And then there's this idea that we as parents sometimes don't want our children to be mad at us. We want our kids to like us. And so we will kind of fall for the, you don't trust me, you don't think I can, again, and these are common things that a lot of adolescents will say. And it's difficult as parents to hold our ground, but it's really important, because I think reframing that a lot of times we're putting these boundaries in place when we're not doing anything to them, we're doing these things for them. And just because our kids can't recognize that this is something that we're doing for them right now, doesn't mean that in fact we're not doing a good thing to protect them and support them. So I just wanted to throw that out there as something to think about. It's sometimes really difficult to both want to give your kids what they want, especially if they're, hey, I'm a straight A student, I do all the things you asked me to do, and why can't I have this? And sometimes it's not about any of that. It's just about, this is I'm a parent and my job is to protect you whether you're a straight A student or not. And so this is why these limits are in place. Did you want to weigh in, Mike?
Yeah, someone told me years ago, someone who was wiser than me, who had kids, said, whatever you do, don't let your kids take their phones into their bedrooms or into the bathroom. And I'm going to say that's possibly one of the smartest things I ever did. And we held that till they were about 16. We kept that rule because, and they still got into trouble, because never underestimate, the powers of a really motivated teen. If they need alone time with their phone and their camera, then, they're going to find a place to do it. But you don't have to make it easy for them. And I would also say, don't rely on the software. Just don't assume that the software is always doing its job, because there's a lot of TikTok channels that are dedicated to kids finding hacks around, whether it's Apple's screen time or, Google Family Link or whatever. There's a couple different services out there. It's like they will always find workarounds. So, these programs are great tools, but there's no replacement for good parenting and following your instincts. We used to let the kids keep the phones in the kitchen at night, right? They would turn off at 10 and we'd tell them to check them into the kitchen. But then a couple times we noticed in the middle of the night, there was a lot of stirring around going on in the kitchen. I'd go back in there and suddenly a phone's missing. It's like, uh-oh. So then the phones had to go into mom and dad's bedroom every night at 10 o'clock to be checked in. And I'm shocked at how many families don't do that, right? Where there is no downtime for their kids' devices. Like they let them use them 24/7 in their bedrooms, and a lot of them will get into trouble. The kids' brains are still developing, and as a teenager, I can speak from my own experience as a kid, growing up in New York. It's like things happen, and teenagers are famously are well known for being impulsive, and adults, but teens tend to be a little bit more impulsive, and they don't necessarily always think things through, like what are the true ramifications of this if I get caught? So that being said, yeah, I think keeping phones out of bedrooms till a certain age, and you got to figure out what that age is in your home, and also making sure that there's downtime at night, and physically confiscate those phones. Don't assume the software is going to do its job, because trust me, there's hacks.
I wanted to talk about cyberbullying. I think we'd be remiss to not mention that in this conversation. I'm going to ask the panelists, like, can someone define it for me? What is cyberbullying? What does it look like? What are some of the primary sources of cyberbullying, and the impact of it on kids and adolescents from other forms of bullying? Anyone jump in? Emma?
That's a really good question. And I think that, cyberbullying takes many different forms. To me, from my perspective and from how I've engaged with other teens, I just see it as any kind of verbal abuse or harm that's caused from one user to another. Again, it takes a lot of different forms. It can be a hate comment. It can be a personal DM. It can come from an account you don't know. Oftentimes, a lot of log off members, and one of my good friends who was cyberbullied, it was by people that she knows in real life. Again, a lot of experiences differ, but the outcome is always usually a teen, a child, or a user feeling as though they are harmed in some way. And I think that the issue with bullying online versus bullying in person too is it's much easier from the bully's perspective because you do not see the immediate outcome and the harm that you're causing another person. And I think that a lot of times too, cyberbullying, it can range in intensity. So I've talked to a lot of individuals too who have said, I accidentally said a mean comment to someone online and I didn't know that it was harmful. Because oftentimes, again, you don't have that immediate reaction of someone in person saying, wait, that really hurt my feelings. Why would you say that? Instead, you have a screen, and it seems it's less connecting. And I feel like it allows a lot of teens to be able to say comments that they would never say in person because you don't have that initial reaction. And again, cyberbullying, I think, is much more rampant than people would like to admit. And I think that it brings up very important discussions too of what do you do when bullying occurs in a class or a unit in those online spaces. How do you regulate it, in person too? I think that it can be a really slippery slope and dangerous conversation for a lot of educators. But I think it's very important for that to be a focal point in conversations with parents and in saying, this is what is acceptable online. This is what you should say, you shouldn't say, but also what do you do when you see another person being harmed or you yourself are harmed? What are the different avenues? Those are really important things to be said with your child. And again, cyberbullying can cause the most harm, I think, outside, obviously, of these online spaces in terms of increased rates of suicide, anxiety, and depression. And again, it's really important just to have those conversations to begin with in order to avoid those negative mental health consequences.
Absolutely. Anyone else want to weigh on this one?
Yeah, so I would just like to add that cyberbullying is really when it's someone that's offending someone with intention, right? With the intention of hurting the person, of causing them to be scared or angry or sad, and doing it repeatedly, right? So like Emma had said, sometimes you don't realize that you're saying something that's hurtful, right? That wouldn't be considered cyberbullying. It'd be someone who's actually intentionally wanting to hurt another person. And just like Emma said, I think it's easier to bully online because you're hiding behind a screen, right? Like no one is seeing what you're doing. No, but sometimes it happens that no one knows who you are, right? You can create a fake account and kind of, intentionally hurt someone else. And it also includes posting pictures or images of someone else, right? Like it's not only text messages, it's not only spreading rumors, but also posting pictures without the other person's consent. That can be considered cyberbullying.
Mike?
Yeah, I think so when I worked at Apple, one of the dreaded jobs I used to get scheduled to do from time to time was to answer the phones. And I'm a very social person, and I always hated it. Like I was always much, much better in person. And one of the reasons I hated it is I noticed that when people are on the phone, they tend to be very nasty, where when they're standing in front of you, people would come in the store, and by the time I was done with them, they'd want to hug me, right? I would make all these weird anomalies go away and fix their issues with their phone and their iPads, and they were always like so grateful. But man, answering those phones, people could be very nasty and very mean. And I'm a pretty sensitive person, so it's like I'd go home and I'm not going to say I'd want to cry, but I would just be like really like bummed out. Like I'd have my own like loss of humanity. So yeah, it makes sense that, I think people, people can be very nasty online, and they can be like tar. And I've always told my kids, like, don't engage with strangers, especially in any kind of debate online, because they will always need to get the last word in, and you will never win. So just if you need to say something, say it and move on. Don't keep going back and looking to see what their response is, because some people, that's all they do is what they call them trolls, right? The internet trolls. It's like, I feel like they live on there, and that's all they do is just spew kind of hatred and nasty comments, and no one wants to be around that. So anyway, I mean, that's I think if you're a bully, that's a tool where it's a very efficient tool, right? Like you can absolutely like, take out a bunch of people at once in a very short period of time if you're going to do something like that. So yeah, I don't like bullies. I don't care for them.
Yeah, I will say some of the mental health consequences of bullying, especially with teens and adolescents, nobody likes a bully. And as adults, we can see, and even our own social media, people have political debates and all kinds of crazy things that they do online, and they speak in ways in very aggressive tones and behaviors in ways that they would never do if they were standing in front of you. And so it's no different among adolescents. I think some of the differences, though, is because kids are, they're young, and some, their brains are still developing, and they are still trying to figure out their sense of self and their boundaries. And so they are often more susceptible to the impact of cyberbullying. And I think, so it's the regular anxiety, depression, sometimes there's post-traumatic stress that arises. Often there's aggressive behavior that arises, and suicidal ideation that arises. And so I can't overstate the detrimental impact of cyberbullying, especially on kids. I've read too many statistics about elementary age children committing suicide after being bullied, both online and in person, or young women who, some boy that they trusted, and they sent some kind of nude or partially nude photograph, and then that person sent it to everybody they knew and published it online. Young girls that have committed suicide or attempted suicide after incidents like that. Just the impact on one's self-esteem, and perfectionism, and hypervigilance, and very, very high levels of anxiety and such associated with both sort of often social media usage in general, but also bullying. And especially so much of it is around appearance and how you look and, you know, your weight and, you know, certain facial features and, you know, all the things. And so I think that it's a super, super important topic. I think it differs, as somebody, as all the panelists, I guess, have mentioned, from other forms of bullying, in that sometimes it's even more vicious because it's not happening in front of you. Like, they're not standing there bullying you. They're hiding behind their lenses or their fake accounts or whatever. And so it can be even more vicious because they're perceived to be safe behind whatever it is they're hiding behind. I think as parents, we need to be really mindful about, you know, kids hide things from us, not necessarily because of the reasons we sometimes think. Sometimes kids hide things from us because they want to protect us, right? My parents are really tired. They're busy at work. They're overwhelmed with my sister or brother. I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to add one more thing. I don't want them to worry about me so they'll sometimes keep things from us as a protective measure. Sometimes they keep things from us because they feel shame about something and they don't want us to, you know, see them in a certain way, or know that I sent a boy a naked picture and I don't want my parents to know I feel shame about this, embarrassment. It's not always just because they want to keep things from us because they, you know, want to hide things. And I think whatever the reason, I think one of the ways that we as parents can mitigate that is to sort of just try to stay connected to our kids, you know, do more family activities, do more family outings, game nights, you know, bake cookies, do more things to engage with your kids so that there's less time to be on their social media during those opportunities to have conversation, to talk with them, and to really be open. Everybody struggles, especially in the last 2 years. This is a very unusual circumstance with long-term kind of societal trauma, right, over the last 2 years. So we all struggle. And being honest with kids, developmentally appropriately, but being honest about days when you have a hard day. I really had a tough day today. I felt sad or worried or whatever. Sometimes when kids are told that some of their parents struggle, even though, you know, we as adults, we understand our circumstances, but young kids especially still view us as people on pedestals and, you know, larger than life sometimes. And so helping them to understand that adults struggle, and here are some of the ways that I struggle, and perhaps that might encourage them to share some struggle that they're having. And maybe it's sort of like, how can we help each other to feel better? Maybe asking your child for suggestions that they might have for how I might feel better as the parent. And then maybe they'll invite us to give them some suggestions about how they might feel better, right? Or we can kind of brainstorm together about how we can help each other to feel better. I just think that the more, and again, even as I say this as a busy parent myself, I know that sometimes it's a tall order. You've been working all day or all week. At the end of the week, maybe you don't want to make cookies. Maybe you don't want to have game night. Maybe you just want to sit down and, like, you know, have a cup of tea and do whatever it is that you want to do. But it's so important now with kids in this environment where there's been months of isolation and months of separation. And, you know, if you're an 8 or 10-year-old, 20 or 25% of your life has been in this COVID environment. That's a huge statistic. It's a huge number, you know, and so just thinking about it from that perspective and how we can, even when we're tired and even when we don't feel like it as parents, really make real efforts to regularly engage with our kids. Because the more connected they feel to their parents, the less time and interest they likely will have, especially, you know, middle and elementary age children in social media, when they would rather be kind of hanging out with us and doing things with us, movie nights, popcorn, puzzles, whatever. And we're winding down. So I just wanted to add one more thing. And this is, I did a panel a couple days ago and this topic came up. You know, the other thing that we didn't kind of mention about social media is that most people will tell you that the more social media you use, the less good you feel about yourself, the worse you feel in general, and the worse you feel about yourself. But paradoxically, you get a dopamine hit from people liking your thing or friending you or sharing your this or that. And, you know, so it's sort of, it's a vicious cycle of I feel bad about myself, I'm feeling worse about myself the more time I spend on here, but I'm getting this sort of ding, 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 this chemical benefit from having people like what I post, having people share what I post, more people friending me, and, you know, more positive comments or what have you. So it is a very much a cycle. And as parents, it's important that we recognize this cycle and break it, right? And you can interrupt the cycle at any point, but you have to know that's what it is. And so when Mike was talking about making sure your kids have breaks, even if they're going to use the internet or social media for multiple hours, gaming, what have you, make them take breaks and things like that. Reasons why we don't have them sleep with them, not taking them in the bathroom, maybe, and other things. You want to be able to interrupt these cycles so that they are able to get off of this sort of hamster wheel of the paradoxical kind of, oh, I'm feeling worse and worse and worse about myself, but I'm getting this chemical high from remaining. So it's just something to think about because it's really challenging. And again, most parents don't hold a candle against their kids in terms of their technological knowledge on any kind of device. As parents, we're never going to win that battle, most of us. So our, you know, a really important way to kind of intervene when we can't meet them at that level is to sort of connect and recognize that we have to sort of set limits and whatever they need to be based on the age and development of your child, but it's really going to be a really important thing to stay on top of. Any other comments from the panel?
I think really knowing your kids is really important, right? Like knowing what their baseline is and knowing, you know, what in general their moods are and really tuning into, wait, there's something different today. Let me check in with my child and see what's going on, right? That's the way to catch things, right? Like you will know unless you have those conversations or unless you're open to just really tuning in and like you said, Kristen, it's nowadays is very difficult with such a fast-paced society and having all those different jobs and roles, right? Like you're not only a parent, but you're also a professional and you're also, you know, a homemaker and all these other things, all these other responsibilities that you might have. But it's always great to, you know, whether it's in the morning or at the end of the day, really checking in with your child and really going into like, hey, how are you feeling today? Or, hey, I've noticed you're just a little bit different. What's going on? You know, really having those open conversations and tuning into any changes in maybe their sleep patterns, or maybe they're withdrawing from friends or not eating enough or eating more than they used to, right? Like those little key alerts that tell you like something's going on, something's different. I need to see what's going on.
Mike or Emma, any thoughts? Final thoughts?
I think I think those are really good points, and I think that kind of meeting them where they're at, right? And I tell all my kids like, you know, you're all so different, and you're not gonna treat them all the same way. Some you might give a little bit more leeway than others, but you know, but I do think it's really important in really trying to be cognizant of what they're doing with their time, who are they spending their time with, asking those questions, you know. And again, little things like picking up the phone at any time, you know. And I'm sorry, some kids are just terrible at hiding things. Like, you know, when your kid is being sketch and when they're, you know, and when they're not. And when they are being sketch, you might want to walk over and pick up the phone and say, excuse me, I need to look at something real quick. You know, it's like follow those instincts. There's no substitute for good parenting. And, you know, a lot of these apps too, you know, they'll like promote themselves as a, you know, set it and forget it. And no, it doesn't, parenting doesn't work that way. You know, so you can't, you got to rely, you have to use a multifaceted approach. Or at least I have, in that, yeah, just, you know, physical limitations, making sure your Wi-Fi home network is locked down, putting some type of parental controls on their phones as well. So, so if things do go awry and they are, they are involved in aggressively, sexual situations or, drugs, alcohol, self-harm, like you want to be alerted to that stuff. And that's where some of that software can be really amazing and really helpful and worth its weight in gold, especially if you can prevent a trip to the ER because your kid has tried to hurt themselves because they're just having a terrible day and you weren't aware of that. And yeah, so it's in that respect, I think that stuff is really, really very powerful and is something that all parents should not shy away from using.
Emma, any last thoughts?
No, I absolutely agree with everything that everyone else has said. And I think that it's just very important coming from a teen to just approach these conversations with your teen and your child from that like curiosity centric perspective and wanting to know how are you doing? How can I help you? Explain to me why you're using these habits. And then from there to build with them standards and rules, because I really think that if parents can be a resource for teens and someone to go to, I always say like in the middle of the pendulum swing. So before there's a huge case of cyberbullying, in the middle when you're feeling anxious or you feel like someone has insulted you or you've insulted someone else and you don't really know what to do. In those periods of discomfort, having that parent as a resource to turn to that you trust is really, really crucial to kind of figuring out how to navigate social media and technology in the best possible way. And I know that, again, it can be really difficult for parents to, muster the energy. And I can imagine too, I've talked with being in college. I joked with my friend, I was like, I now understand in college that, my parents are humans, like they are just people too. And I think that it takes a lot. And a lot of times it takes some time for kids to really understand that. And I really applaud parents who like go the extra mile to ask those questions and to really engage with your child or your teen, because from the back end and being a child, it makes the difference. It really does allow, I think, that path to go to and that resource to access when you're needed. And I really just want to say, start those conversations because they'll keep going. And they're really crucial to developing those healthier habits down the line, because I'm a college student now, and the habits and conversations that I had when I was a teenager with my parents are still with me, and they still really made a difference. So every conversation, every word counts.
I appreciate that perspective. And it is, as many of us parents, it's useful to hear that from a teen. So we're like 4 minutes out. So I just want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. And I really want to thank our panelists, Evelyn, Mike, and Emma. You in particular, as a very young woman, you're incredibly poised and articulate and so bright. And I think what you're doing is fantastic. And I wish you so much luck and success in all of your future endeavors around this work, which is really, really important. If you or anyone have a child that might benefit from talking to one of our therapists or our walk-in clinic, our walk-in clinic is open on Tuesdays at 3:30, and Spanish and an English language therapists are available. Please go to our website at astonchildguidance.org for more information. For any of you who made a contribution to tonight's event, we want to thank you so much. You are supporting children and families who would not otherwise have access to mental health care. And many of those clients happen to be people of color or from other marginalized groups and who really need it. And so we want to thank you for that. We offer these panel discussions 8 or 9 times a year. And so please watch out for more details for future panel discussions. There will be a video and a list of resources that were discussed in this panel discussion posted on our website next week. Finally, we'd like to invite you to join us for our ACGC Family Fest and Austin Originals benefit concert and event, which is April 2nd, which is a Saturday at Circuit of the Americas. There's going to be amusement park rides and games and music on a very lovely April day, and talking about connecting with your children. This is a great way for parents to connect with their kids. And that's from 2 to 11 on April 2nd. And following that in the evening is a concert with Diana Ross as our headliner. And so that starts at 8 p.m. So all of this information is available on our website. You can go to Ticketmaster to buy tickets to see Diana Ross. All proceeds will benefit Austin Child Guidance Center so that we can continue to provide the services that we provide for kids and family in our community. And I just want to thank you all so much. There's lots of other things you could have been doing on Monday night, and the fact that you spent it with us, we really appreciate that. And we hope that this was helpful to you all. So thank you all so much and have a really good evening.